So twice in the 20th century, early 20th century, twice, I don't know if you knew this, Texas and Oklahoma nearly went to war. The first time dealt with where exactly is the boundary line for the Red River? Because the boundary for the Red River is on the south bank of the river. But as you know, rivers move, right? And for a long time, nobody cared. Well, it's a few feet of dirt, what's it matter? Until they discovered oil. And then it became critical about who owns those few feet, right? And so Oklahoma and Texas and the federal government got involved because the federal government said, no, that's our land, right? And it took the Supreme Court ruling where exactly the property line is. The second time was that up north of Denison, there was a bridge across the Red River, and it was a toll bridge operated by the state of Texas. And Oklahoma built a bridge next to it that was free. And so Texas blocked Oklahoma's bridge. So the governor of Oklahoma rolled out the troops, and the governor of Texas called out the Texas Rangers, and they were armed and ready to go before they calmed down. Right? It's just an example of how boundaries are important in our relationships and how the conflict can emerge when those boundaries are not clearly defined or they get challenged. Now, last week you got the notebook, and then you should have gotten the extra pages for tonight. If anybody did not get that, anybody not get the extra pages? Okay. All right, and so remember the first page in the workbook is the QR code. If you have any questions during the session or afterwards, you can submit those questions, and I'll try to address them either tonight or in future sessions. We've got a few people that have submitted questions, and we address those at the end tonight. All right, so let's kind of review what we did last time. You selected 5 people that you want to try to improve or deepen your relationships with. And these are your laboratory, these are the relationships you're going to be experimenting on, right? To see, do these skills make any difference? And so you picked out your 5. And then we looked at the idea that in most relationships issues, we often see the problem as something the other person is doing. And that rolls around in their head, and I can't believe they said this, or they need to, right? But we're often blind to how we contribute to the dysfunction. As we kind of set up the exercise last time about what do you see as the problem, and then the ratio, we tend to kind of think, well, it's 80% their fault, 20% mine, and I only do my 20% because they did their 80%, right? And so what we're trying to do is figure out what can we work on in ourselves? How do we first increase awareness of the role we're playing in the relationship instead of focusing on the other? Because when we focus on the other, there's frankly not much we can do about it, and it creates frustration, okay? And so I tell my clients, I can't stop other people from starting fires, but I can figure out how and why I keep pouring gasoline on the fires they start. Right. Okay. So we're going to be talking more tonight about this whole concept of boundaries. And boundaries, obviously physical boundaries are the fences, the property lines about where property lies. What's my backyard? What's your backyard? I knew a person who had bought a house, and I don't remember the time frame, but the city came in and told him, by the way, half of your backyard is not yours. That was never yours. That was the previous owner just assumed it was theirs and built a fence out there. That was city greenbelt and lost half their yard, right? That's the problem with where are the boundaries, okay? Well, emotionally and in relationships, by backyards, what we mean is if it involves my thoughts, emotions, or behavior, it's my backyard. If it involves someone else's thoughts, emotions, or behavior, it's their backyard. And so the boundaries exist for two reasons. One is to keep you out of my backyard, and one is to keep me out of your backyard. So when Karen and I moved to Wisconsin, we bought this house, and in Wisconsin, we didn't know this, up in the Midwest, in a lot of the areas, there's no fences. All the houses and the yards are just wide open space. Well, now we have 4 dogs. We had 2 dogs at the time. And so we thought, oh, what are we going to do? And so we're moving in, and while we're moving in, we open the door and the dogs get out. So Karen and I take off, chasing the dogs, and they're taking off, and they run down to this restaurant way down across the traffic, and we're out there trying to get these dogs, and we come back, and there's some people standing in your front yard going, are these your children? While we were going after the dogs, the boys got out and took off, right? So one of the reasons we need fences is not to keep other people out of my backyard, it's to keep me in my backyard, okay? And when I learned about this from my mentor, he had us do this. Take your hands like this, one facing away and one facing towards you. This is the boundary of protection. Stay out of my backyard. This is the boundary of containment. I need to stay out of your backyard. And we often think about the boundary of protection, how to protect me from other people, but how do I protect other people from me? And so when I learned this, I noticed that in the past, a friend might post something on Facebook and a discussion would start, and I'd jump in with my thoughts, and here's why they're wrong, and they need to think differently, right? And then it hit me, I don't have a very good boundary of containment. They didn't ask for my input. This is their Facebook page, right? They're free to post what they want. And so I had to learn, how do I stay in my own backyard? Okay. Then the other thing we looked at is this idea of taking ownership of our backyard, meaning nobody else makes me feel anything. I make me feel what I feel. But we often think because it happens so automatically and so quickly, we make an incorrect cause and effect assumption that you did this, I felt this, therefore you made me feel this. But we overlook the fact it all had to go through my brain. And my brain had to process it and tell myself a story, and that's what created my emotions. And so we talked last time about what's the story I tell myself when things happen, and how does that story create my emotions so that I'm not blaming other people for my emotions. Now, we're all responsible for our behavior. I think I used the illustration last time, if your car got stolen, how would you feel about it, okay? If I steal your car, I am responsible for my behavior. I'm responsible for having stolen your car. I am not responsible for how you feel about it. You did that to yourself. But I don't get off the hook for my behavior, okay? I'm responsible for my behavior. I'm not responsible for anybody else's emotions. And so one of the reasons backyards are so important to understand is when this gets confused, you said it creates a lot of conflict. So the story is told of 2 retired ministers attend a wedding. And they're sitting out there, and the minister up front delivering the wedding, and he says, "And the two shall become one." And one of the retired ministers leans over the other and says, "Yes, but the question is, which one?" Okay? That we like this idea, we become one, but in reality, we're always still two people with different interests and desires and wants, and we're trying to negotiate that. And forgive me for all the stories I repeat, because I'm old. So when I got married, about 3 weeks into it, I was typing on the computer, and Karen came out, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm typing on the computer." And she said, "My computer?" I said, "What do you mean, your computer? We're married." She said, "That's my laptop, and you didn't ask." So I got all mad, and I said, "Buy your own hammer. Don't ever use my tools again," right? If you're going to play this game, I can play this game, right? Because I assumed we got married, and now there's no boundary lines. The backyards are one. Truth is, if I came in and she'd been brushing her teeth with my toothbrush, I would have said, hey, what are you doing, right? It's just I didn't define the boundary line where she did, and I assumed mine is the right one, right? And that's what happens. So we have to be aware of these boundary lines. Okay, and then the skill we practiced last time is how do we talk about our own backyard? And that was the sheet you have in the pocket of your notebook there, the talking boundaries. That's arranged to make us think a certain way. We don't normally talk this way, but the idea being, I saw or heard something, so information came in. My brain took that information and formed it into a story. I told myself this. It may be a true story. I'm not saying it's a fiction, but it is a story. That's how our brain works. And that created emotions. And what we want to be able to do, ideally, is talk that way with each other. I'm going to talk about my backyard, not your backyard. Okay? And we'll go into this a little bit more here in a bit. Okay, so tonight, here's what we're going to be kind of talking about. Fences have gates. And as we talked about last time, the story of you meet your neighbor and you say, I want to cut a hole in this fence and install a gate. The gate is the way we regulate the relationship. And there's two gates. There's not one. There's like an adjoining hotel rooms. You have those two doors that both of them have to be open. Okay? And so if you're going to go back and forth and have a relationship between the two hotel rooms, both doors have to be open at the same time. But in life, the doors are not open all the time. I have my room, you have your room. I have my backyard, you have yours, and I get to decide when my gate is open and closed, and you get to decide yours. Okay? And so what I mean is this. Well, let's think of this. Imagine you have a hotel room, and it's got those adjoining doors, and you open your door, but the door is shut because you don't have a clue who that person is, right? And you knock on the door, hey, open up, right? They'd be going, what kind of is this, right? But if that's your kids in there, hey, open up. I need to know what's going on, right? And so we're regulating those gates. When is my gate open and when is yours open or closed? And there's a number of ways that we close our gate emotionally. One is, when am I willing to listen to you? So one way I close the gate is shutting down. What am I willing to say to you? How much do I open it? How much do I let you in? What behavior in you will I open it for? If you act this way, I'll open my gate. If you act that way, I'll close my gate. And how much do I let you in? If I'm going to invite you into my backyard, how far in do I let you into my backyard? How much do I reveal? Okay? So the gate is the primary way we regulate the relationship. And one of the things that can be helpful is learning to announce when our gate is open. So imagine you go to the store, we go to a restaurant, and it just says closed out front. What in the world, right? But if there's a sign that says be back in an hour, oh, now I get it, right? And so one of the things that happens, so Gottman, the couples researcher, says that sometimes what happens in relationships is we become emotionally flooded, our system becomes overwhelmed, and we shut down. And he calls it stonewalling, where I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And often what that does is it makes the other person feel unsafe, right? And so what he says is, okay, there's times you need to do that, but announce for how long, right? I can't deal with this right now. I need an hour by myself. That helps the other person feel, oh, good, you're not just shutting me out. I know what to expect, right? So part of when I open and close the gate, ideally, is knowing how to announce under what conditions and time my gate will be opened. Now think about, why is it we close our gate in relationships? Upset, right? I'm hurt, right? We close our gates because we don't feel safe, right? Whenever we're using it as protection. Sometimes we close it as containment, but so one of the struggles that happens is, well, think of it like this. You open your gate to someone in your life and you see their gate is closed. You reach out to your adult children and they won't talk to you, okay? And it creates anxiety. And so we knock and knock and knock and send a note under the door, whatever we got to do to get your attention, right? It can help if we ask ourselves, why is their gate closed? It could be a lot of different reasons. We don't know exactly. Maybe it's not a good time. But sometimes it can be, they don't feel safe with me, right? So if I've gotten in an argument with my wife, and she goes to the other room and she's not talking to me, and I get anxious and I want her to talk to me, that's going to backfire, right? Right? Because she doesn't feel safe and I'm in there pounding emotionally on the door, right? And if I can calm myself to recognize, oh, she doesn't feel safe, what do you think she needs to feel safe? Right? Well, vice versa. If I close my gate to you, what needs to happen is for me to be able to tell you I don't feel safe with you. But here's the catch-22, here's the struggle. If I don't feel safe with you, the last thing I want to do is be vulnerable and tell you I don't feel safe with you, right? And so that's why we often shut down and go passive, which we'll talk about here in a bit. Okay, so the gate is often about the issue of trust and safety. If the gate's closed, one of the first questions we ought to consider, it's not always the case, is does the other person have their gate closed because they don't feel safe with me? And if so, what, if anything, can I do about that? Okay, now here's what I want to do. If you look in your book, there's a section here on 5 levels of conversation. Let's see what we're on. This comes from a book by Gary Chapman. Deals with marriage, but it'd be true of any relationship, I think. And he states that there's 5 levels of conversation. The first one he calls hallway talk. Think of you're walking down the hallway at work. Hey, Bob, how you doing? Hey, Jim. Right? Kind of, hey, how are you doing? It's very surfacey. There's no real depth to it, but socially it has a place. Okay? He says, in marriage, we engage in hallway talk. Good morning, did you rest well? Right? We're just making a little chit-chat kind of stuff. Level 2 is he calls reporter talk. Just give me the facts. And this is conversation about who, what, where, when, how, that kind of stuff, right? Who's picking up the kids, what time. Again, it's not necessarily about opening up, but it's, again, has its place, it's needed. But he says something that's interesting. You tell each other what you have seen and heard today, so like, how was your day? Oh, here's what happened. When and where it took place, but you share nothing of your opinion about the event, right? Hey, how was your day? Oh, it was good. This happened, but you're not opening up. Okay, so those are levels 1 and 2. Level 3, he calls intellectual talk. Do you know what I think? And level 3 is where we go beyond sharing factual information and we start sharing our opinions, interpretations, and judgments. He says we're choosing to reveal how we are processing information in our minds. In essence, we start sharing the stories we're telling ourselves about the facts. And the possibility of conflict is much more likely on level 3 than on level 1 and 2 because my thoughts may not always be your thoughts. So level 3 is where conflict starts happening. Because, well, think about what conflict is. Conflict is two competing ideas or emotions. It doesn't necessarily have to be with another person. I can have conflict inside of me, right? And two people who aren't even talking can be in conflict because they have different ideas. We think of conflict as when we start arguing, but conflict exists no matter if or how we're working on the conflict. So a conflict happens because we see things differently. And he says about level 3, if we're going to have productive intellectual talk, we must give each other the freedom to think differently. But think about what happens when you hear somebody think differently than you. It often stirs up some anxiety within us. And so we feel the need to change our mind or shut it down, right? And that's where the conflict comes from. He says we must seek to understand their point of view by trying to look at the world through their eyes. Our objective is to understand each other, not necessarily to agree with each other. So at level 3, it's critical that we give each other the freedom to think and feel, think differently. And manage my backyard. What happens in me when you tell me something about your backyard, your thoughts? Think about politics. Somebody shares their political view, and the other side, and we need that, no, you can't think that way, instead of going, oh, yeah, that's my backyard. You're not making me feel that, I am. Okay, and here it says something I think is really important. We share our opinions not as dogma, but as the way I am presently perceiving a situation. If we seek to condemn each other's ideas, we create an environment that makes it difficult to share future opinions. None of us like to fight. We think better to keep my thoughts to myself than to get in a fight, we reason. But the absence of fighting does not mean that we have intimacy. It means rather that we are choosing to live in our own world and not share life with the other person. So we have to be careful to recognize my thoughts are simply my thoughts. They are not the truth. They are my understanding of the truth. But when I equate my thoughts with the truth, dogma, we're now saying I'm right and you're wrong, even if we don't say that and it's implied, these little subtle ways, which makes the other person feel unsafe. And what happens when we feel unsafe? We close the gate, right? And you can watch this when you're talking with people, right? You're talking with them and something happens and you see their face just kind of glaze over and they, right? They have announced, nope, I don't feel safe with you, I'm shutting my gate, right? because we have said something that their system heard as a threat. And so that's why it's important that level 3, we allow the freedom to think differently, because you can't go to level 4 unless you do level 3 well. All right, so level 4, he calls emotional talk. Let me tell you how I feel. On level 4, we share our emotions, how we feel about things. I feel hurt, disappointed, angry, happy, etc. And he says, we risk much more when we communicate on this level because we also have the potential for entering a higher level of communication. So when we move from thoughts to feelings, we become more vulnerable. But it's also where intimacy gets deeper. It's what we all want, but it's frightening. Okay? And he says, the ability to hear each other's emotions and encourage further conversation to explain more fully what they're feeling and why gives us a deep sense of emotional connection. If I want to, the way it was explained to me is when you think of the word intimacy, think of into me you see. I'm going to emotionally get naked. I'm going to show you the real me. And it's frightening. And what you say determines if I close up or if I feel safe, right? And that's what we're trying to do emotionally in relationships. We're trying to get at that deeper level. That's what we all long for, but we're terrified of. All right, level 5. He calls it loving, genuine truth talk. Let's be honest. He says, we are honest. On this level, we are honest, but not condemning, open, but not demanding. It allows each of us freedom to think differently and feel differently, to process life together so that we may be supportive, encouraging, and loving towards one another. That's what we all long for in our relationships, but it's the scariest level. Okay, so here's your exercise in your book. Here's what I want you to do. For each of the 5 people in your relationships you're working on, I want you to just think about these questions. What is the deepest level of those 5 levels? What's the deepest level you feel comfortable with, on average, that you feel comfortable with, comfortable in with this person? So is this a relationship where you feel safe going down to feelings, or is this a relationship where you learned, now I'm going to stay up here, let's just have surface talk? Right? And you may have times to get there, but overall, where would you say you put yourself? Then, what do you think is the deepest level you believe the other person is comfortable with? You might want to go deep, but they may not feel safe going deep. You don't know unless you've asked them, but when you think about the relationship and the pattern, what do you see? And then, what do you believe hinders the relationship going to the next deeper level? So take a moment for all 5 of your relationships you're going to be working on. Answer those questions if you would. Okay, let's move on here. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about are three approaches, three stances in our relationship with other people. I think is this not? Can you go to the? There we go. Okay, thank you. And this is in your book there. All right, three positions. The first one is passive. And passive says your needs matter, mine don't. I'm going to give you whatever you want or need. I'm just going to let it go, keep my mouth shut. Now, we rarely do that because we're kind and generous people. We like to think that's why. We often do it because what we really want, more than what we say we're wanting at the time, is pseudo-peace. Let's just not fight about it. So if my wife and I say, hey, let's go out to eat, where do you want to eat? She wants chicken, I want steak, right? I put up a fuss, we're going to the steakhouse. She says, fine, I'd rather just have chicken, eat with you than have what I want, right? But what if it's really important to her, but now she's just swallowing it, right? So we have pseudo-peace. So we often go passive because we're just trying to gloss things over. On the other extreme is aggressive. And aggressive says, my needs matter, yours don't. And we often do this because we've gotten, so we say, triggered to the point where I feel the need to defend myself at all costs. And we do it in a way that focuses on the other person, what we've been talking about with boundaries. So in essence, what I'm doing is I'm going to tell you what's wrong with your backyard, what you're doing wrong, why you shouldn't feel that way, why you'd better change. I'm going to get what I want. I don't care about you. And then assertive is my needs matter and your needs matter. Doesn't mean I can always give you what you want, but I can at least try to hear your position and understand it and respect it, even if I don't agree with it, okay? And there's an important line there between assertive and aggressive, and that's the boundary line. That's the fence, okay? So anytime I am focused on my neighbor, the other person, needing to change something about them, I have technically gone aggressive. I'm focused on you need to change. And that's just like climbing over the fence and going in their backyard and starting to rummage things around, okay? On the other hand, passive is when I don't take full possession of my backyard. I give you possession of part of my backyard, and I just kind of cower over here in the corner, right? And what it leads to is resentment, because I want my yard back, right? Okay. So again, the problem with being passive is it often leads to resentment. Things get swept under the rug, as we say. And the line I tell my clients is, so I have 4 dogs. If one of them poops in the house and I sweep it under the couch, the room's clean, but now the house stinks, right? And I don't know why. And that's what happens whenever we try to go passive and just try to keep the peace and appease, it eventually leaks out. So that, now, granted, obviously there's times to go passive, right? Somebody's carjacking you, holding a gun to your head. It's not a time to say, let's talk about my feet, right? Sure, take the car, right? Okay. And again, the problem with aggressive is it's focused on changing the other, but in a way that takes away their autonomy. And that builds defensiveness. If you come into my backyard, I've got to try to push you out however I need to, right? And so when we start telling people what they need to change, they're going to throw up the wall and slam their gate. Okay, now, I wrestled with this thing. Is there a problem with being assertive? I got thinking, well, I don't know it's helpful to go around needing to share what I think about every little thing, right? Some things I need to just go, okay, whatever, let it go, right? If I truly can let it go. If it really is still bothering me, if I can't work it out internally or forgive or whatever, if I'm holding a grudge, whether big or small, then I think it's best, it's not easy, and I'm not claiming I do it well or often, but assertive. And that's why some say, if you want to have less arguments, have more arguments. Meaning, don't sweep stuff under the rug, go deal with it before it gets out of hand. Okay? Now we often don't, I think, because our experience says, yeah, but every time we try to talk about it, we just get the fight going again. And that's true until we learn some different skills or make some change. We often just, and that's why couples, when they come in for couples counsel, what you often hear, the number one thing couples say when you ask, so what's going on, what do you need help with? They'll say communication. And what that means is we're either fighting all the time or we're not talking. And it usually is we were fighting all the time and we got tired of it, so now we just don't talk and now we just live as roommates. Okay. Now, there's another part to assertiveness that's critical, and we'll be getting into this next week. But that is, it's not just explaining my needs, it's also learning to listen to the other person's needs. So I'm not going to just tell you about my backyard, I'm also going to work really hard on listening to and trying to understand your backyard. It's not just, well, I stood up for myself, now you have to deal with it. I'm going to work really hard on trying to hear your backyard, even if I think it's the craziest thing under the sun. Right? And another thing about boundaries is boundaries, always keep this in mind, boundaries are meant to change my behavior. Boundaries never exist to change your behavior. So people often say, you're not respecting my boundaries. Nobody is obligated to respect our boundaries. The boundary changes me, not them. Because I can't make them change anyway. Now, what I can do is when they cross the boundary, then I got to figure out what I'm going to do about it. And that's the behavior in me I have to change. But often we'll say, well, you didn't respect my boundary. Well, what did you do as a result? Well, nothing. I told them to stop. Okay. So like with my kids, right? Hey, you need to put your dishes away, and they don't. Well, I can get mad at them, or I can say there's consequences. But to just harp on them, put your dishes away, push your dishes away, doesn't work. And that's the problem is we often are afraid to make the change in my life. And that's why we want them. The way I heard it is, boundaries are about changing us. If they're about changing the other, they're rules, not boundaries. But rules are only as effective as we enforce them. Okay, exercise 2. Here's what I want you to do. With all 5 of your people there, look at that continuum. Where would you say, on average, you relate to the person? Do you tend to be more passive with them? Do you tend to be aggressive, meaning you talk about them? So like with my boys, if I'm honest, I'm aggressive because I talk a lot about what they need to change in their life. and that's technically aggressive. There's other relationships we tend to be passive. And then there's a lot of relationships we swing back and forth, right? But just look at your own, where you place yours.
Curtis,
Yes,
is it possible to switch from passive and aggressive?
absolutely. It usually happens. So thank you. Usually what happens, well, a lot of people, they go passive, and it builds into resentment, and it's building, and it's building, and it's building until something triggers, and now it swings to the other side. And they blow up, and how many times have I told you, I don't have to put it. And then we see all the damage we've done, and we feel bad, and we go, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And we go back to passive. And now the cycle starts again. We let it build up, build up, build up. And that's where a lot of couples especially get stuck. Okay, what I want to do the rest of the time, we'll do something a little differently tonight. So a number of people submitted questions online, and I'm going to address those, and we'll open this up to some discussion. You can share your thoughts. I've already kind of spent some time working on my thoughts and response, but we'll see. All right, so number one, if you genuinely think you can help someone and really just want to offer advice with something they may not have thought of that you think will help their situation, how do you bring it up if you're not invited to do so? So what do you think? You look in somebody's backyard, metaphorically, and you're going, oh my goodness, if only they would, but they haven't asked me. What can you do?
Ask for permission.
Yeah,
Ask if they want to hear your observation.
yeah. So in my training, I would attend these men's groups, and people would kind of report on what's going on. And the rule was, after someone speaks and have shared, then guys would say, are you open to some feedback? Right? And that's what they were doing, is saying, and the person was free to say yes or no, I really don't care what you think. I've told myself, right? Ask for permission. Knock on the gate, right? Flip it around. Let's say there's something going on in your yard that you don't know about, and the other person sees something. What would you want them to do? Okay? Yeah, they may have some advice. Have you ever not wanted them to tell you? Sure. Right? Why?
Well, they call the city on me every week.
Okay, yeah. You may not tell me something that's helpful or what I want to hear. Right? Here's a life rule, one of my life rules. Unsolicited advice will always be heard as criticism. Unsolicited advice, so I didn't ask for your advice and you walk up and give it to me, will always be heard. I get it, always, you can't say always, but will often be heard as criticism. Why? What does it seem to be implying? Yeah. You're too stupid to see the obvious, right? So I think about when working on my car as a kid, my dad came, you need to, Oh, thanks, Dad. I have been working on this for 6 hours and seeing, make it sound so simple. Maybe you ought to get that right. And that's the problem. When we try to give advice that hadn't been asked for, it makes people close their gate. And that's why we have to ask for permission. And then, when we share it, we talk about us, not them. Hey, I've noticed this, and when I see it, here's what happens in me. Hey, I've noticed you got some weeds in your backyard, and feel kind of sad about that for you. You look like you don't want weeds in your yard. I get them sounding clinical, right? I have found this great weed killer that worked on mine. I don't know if it'll work on yours, but right? You're offering instead of demanding. And that's the problem. We often say, well, you ought to, you should, and those are kind of authority talking down to words. And if we come at it with humility, maybe this will work, maybe not. Maybe you know something I don't know and why it won't work. But if I talk about me instead of them, it often comes off better. So if we see somebody that could benefit from our help, I don't think there's anything wrong. Oh, think of it, you're driving down the road and somebody's pulled over with a flat. What do you say? If you pull over to help them, what do you say? Can I give you a hand? You don't just go over and, here, move out of the way, let me, right?
I actually found I did that once. It was a lady, and I was just like, here, let me start. But all of a sudden I realized, I was like, do you want me to help change your
Yeah.
tire? So
Great insight. Yeah, right. Now, when we feel that when we come off aggressive, it's because it made us anxious. I see what's going on in your life, and I'm anxious, and I want it to change, so I don't respect your autonomy. So now I try to impose and convince and persuade instead of offer. Right? So we have to manage my anxiety. The last couples counseling training I went to, he talked about it is critical. I'm not good at this yet. It's critical to manage your anxiety before trying to work on the couple's anxiety. You're going to mess it up if you don't, right? But I'll see it going on, I'll get nervous, and right? And he says, imagine you've got some popcorn and you're just watching the show, right? Oh, look at them fight, isn't that interesting, right? That's the image I'm supposed to practice. Okay, number 2. I understand we are not to change someone, but don't both people need to make changes to accommodate the relationship to make each other feel safe and valued? I understand we are not to change someone, but don't both people need to make changes to accommodate the relationship to make each other feel safe and valued? Thoughts?
Sometimes it may just be one person that needs to change.
Yeah, could be. As I read through this question, and again I'm nitpicking, because I thought, when we say, I understand we are not to change someone, I would say, no, it's not that we're not supposed to. We can't. And when I try to change someone, I'm overstepping my bounds. So it's not that I'm not supposed to change someone, it's I have to accept the reality that I can't change someone. And attempting to change someone else is technically aggressive. Now I can offer, and that's not aggressive. And part of this gets down to what do we mean by change versus trying to influence. And it's when I'm not respecting their autonomy, that they have the right. Now, part of this has to do with the type of relationship, right? If you're a boss and you got an employee, but even then, you don't get to tell them what they must do. I get it, we talk that way. But basically, you're saying, here's what I want you to do, and if not, I will enforce consequences, right? It would take forever to say that, so we just say, hey, I need you to go do that, right? Second, maybe the other person isn't open to having a relationship. or have any interest in making you feel safe and valued. If I look and go, well, why won't that change? Maybe they're not interested in a relationship. Or maybe they're not interested in a genuine relationship. Back to the, we now become one, which one, right? Now, what you can do, I think, is talk about what you feel. I don't feel safe and valued in this relationship, or with what you just said, I don't feel safe or valued. And then you can make a request. It's always appropriate to make a request because that's talking about me. That's talking about what I want. It's not technically about changing the other. It's offering them the freedom to accept the request or not. As I say to my clients, assertiveness is saying, let me write down on a piece of paper who I am and give it to you. And you have the freedom then to wad it up and throw it in the trash if you want. Or you have the freedom to read it and say thank you. Right? I'm making a request, but you have the freedom of what you're going to do with it. Okay, third one. Is it helpful or harmful to realize you don't have any cards in the game at the moment? That is, you have apologized and received no feedback. What do you think? Helpful or harmful? As they put the question. Okay? Is it helpful or harmful to realize you don't have any cards in the game at the moment? You have apologized and you've received no feedback.
I guess that kind of comes down to you don't control their side of their emotions and their gate. They will open it whenever they're ready to do so.
Yeah. As I look at it, I think it's helpful. I'm recognizing the reality of the situation. Right? It may be, depending on what this person meant by harmful, right? And then if you use the analogy, they say, they're using the analogy of cards. Well, think about you're playing a card game and you realize you played all your cards, you don't have any left. Now what? You accept the reality, I don't have any cards to play. And now you wait and see what happens. And that's the hard part is, but I want a relationship with you. I've opened my gate and you won't open yours. Well, they're not making you feel bad. You're making yourself feel bad when you see their gate is closed by the story you tell yourself. The story is, I want a relationship with you and I can't get it and that makes me sad. Breaks my heart. Okay. But it's not their responsibility to make me feel better. Now, what you could do is you could ask for feedback. Hey, I've apologized. I'd love to know what you think about that. And they have the freedom to say yes or no or shove off or, right? But if you ask for feedback, be willing to hear it without challenging it. Because they give us feedback and then we go, well, yeah, but, right? We're free to think, and I reject your feedback. I don't have to necessarily say it, right? That's what hits me. Number 4, last one here. What if the story we are telling ourselves is true and they have broken a boundary? So here's something that gets lost sometimes with my clients. They'll go, but I'm not telling my story. It's true. I'm not saying the stories are fiction. They may be true stories. But the way our mind works is it makes meaning through stories. It takes the information and it arranges it in a story to make meaning of it. That's how our mind works. It may be an absolutely true story. The story I told myself was I drove here tonight in my car and I didn't have a wreck. Okay, true story. And I'm glad, right? So just saying I told myself a story doesn't mean I lied to myself. Okay? It's the second part of it. What if the stories tell myself is true and they have broken a boundary? Okay. Well, what do you think? Yeah, you could inform them. You've walked into my yard. I think I told you last time my parents grew up in Oklahoma, and the neighbors that would pull their weeds all the time in their yard, and one day they came out and they were in my dad's yard pulling weeds. You could say, excuse me, stay in your yard, right? You could tell them. What else could you do? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's more. Right, sure. Come on in and, yeah. I suspect that what's behind this is they have hurt me. I told myself the story, they've hurt me, but they really did. Okay. Then, if you feel safe enough, tell them I feel hurt. But don't say, I get it, we talk this way, but instead of saying you hurt me, ideally if you can say, when you said that is the ugliest haircut I've ever seen in my life, I felt really hurt by that, right? Right? And the idea is what you want to say when I heard or saw, you want it to be factual. You want it to be something that they would agree with. So if you say, when you chewed me out about that the other day, well, I didn't, right? If you said, when you said, hey, what are you doing? Don't do that. Oh, okay, yeah, I did say that. The story I told myself is you were chewing me out about that, right? So you want the first part of it to be factual. When I saw or heard, and then you can share it. Now, here's what will often happen. When we practice assertiveness, people will hear it as aggressiveness. And so they'll get defensive or go on the attack. And there's a great meme I saw. Where's this? I'll try to do it from memory. I don't see where it is. The people who get upset when we establish or maintain boundaries are the people who are benefiting from the lack of boundaries. If I'm putting a proper boundary in place and they get mad, that's on them. When I say, hey, you need to pick up your dishes, and he gets mad, it's probably because I've been letting him get away with it, right? So practicing assertive, in fact, so when I would lead the court-ordered drug treatment, and the guys loved talking about relationships. And so we would talk about this stuff. And they'd come back, and I'd say, well, how was your week? And they said, Mr. Curtis, we applied what you said, but it didn't work. I said, really? What happened? Well, we got in a big fight. I said, well, the goal isn't that you don't fight. You can't control that. The goal is, when she fights, you don't add to it. You may, by practicing assertiveness, create more arguing, where before you just learned to be passive. So it doesn't necessarily mean this is going to create calm. The goal is that it establishes communication so that ideally we can work through stuff, right? But practice, and that's why we avoid assertiveness. We go with passive because it's just so much easier in the short run. Okay. Okay, 7:38, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. All right, so again, you've got the QR code there in your book. If you got any more questions you want to have addressed, and if you want a question that we don't address publicly here, but you would like for me to address privately back, what you can do is in your question, just add your, if you don't mind it not being anonymous, you can add your name or phone number to text or email. And then I can reply that way. You can say, hey, let's discuss this privately. But any I get the usual way anonymous, we'll use it just for discussion in here. Okay? All right. Good to see y'all.
a couple of days ago, and the loudspeaker came on. Said, "Would the person who's driving a red Prius please come?"
Uh-huh.
Oh no, he got hit again.
Right?
Well, no, I got hit by this very angry woman who told me, "You parked crooked,"
Wow.
and I could hardly get out of my car. And now I need to go home. And that car's in my way.
Right?
Well, okay, I didn't realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had two items I was going to try to, if I was going to have to go out.
Uh-huh.
and what.
Yeah.
Well, there were people in